Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for Podscribe's Q2 2026 PPB Webinar. My name is Christy May. I am a product marketing manager here at Podscribe. Have you been here before? Have you attended our webinars?
Yeah, I think last time we had quite a few people in the "this is my first" category, which was really exciting. So I'm curious what we see here today.
And officially, what number are we on?
Well, it's got to be at least 12.
I think we started ours 2 quarters after Podsites stopped theirs.
So there's
so whenever that was.
Yeah, right, 12 or 14. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That means Adam McNeil has been to 100% of them, I think. We should actually just have a radio button that just says Adam McNeil on this question.
Yeah. All right, let's take a look at the results.
Wow. This is great. To the 20% of you and the 4% of you that have been here so many times, thank you. For those of you that have been here once or twice or you're first, welcome and welcome back. It's awesome to see you all here. Thank you.
Just quickly before we jump into the data, a little bit about who we are and what this report is. So Podscribe is the leading independent omni-channel advertising measurement platform. Brands, agencies, and publishers use us to easily identify and understand what's working and where to optimize when it comes to their ad strategy. We provide tools for omni-channel attribution and incrementality, placement and delivery, research and planning, and even smart campaign activation and targeting. So one of the ways we share these insights is through our PPB, which is also known as Podscribe Performance Benchmark Report. Each quarter, we dive into the data to uncover trends and the best practices shaping the audio industry. And this webinar is condensed for time, so we'll only share some of the highlights and new data points that we've uncovered this quarter. And we're going to now introduce our presenters for today. We have Pete Bersinger, our CEO and founder, Matt Drangler, our head of partnerships, and Cam Weber, our senior director of partnerships. And I will now pass it on to Pete to run us through the highlights.
All right. Thank you, Christy. Hello, all. Thank you, everybody who's joining. For this report, I think we have a couple new things where I think they can help probably give some insights for people looking for better performance. And in terms of our aim with these reports, we want to give the industry as good of an overview of what we see that's happening in the most important trends, and also concrete steps to actually improve performance. So I think we've got some good insights here. And I think as every time we do these reports, we always have a bit of a dilemma where the thought is, okay, should we, how much of the effort should be spent rehashing old conclusions like, is ad length still, generally better for podcasting, or how much of these reports and webinars should we focus on newer content? So our approach mostly, and maybe any feedback we always like to hear it. Our approach is we try to add a couple new things each report that are novel, that are relating to the most pressing things in the industry, and that have novelty to them that have not been stated before. And then we do continue to put older conclusions still in the report, but we don't give them as much attention in the webinar. And so one of the first takeaways is that most of our metrics remain fairly stable over time. And if ever you have any general questions about performance, we do have our AI chatbot that Cam demoed last time. We have a link to it at the end. You can go through all the past reports for any questions at any time to go back, refresh yourself, discuss with it the findings, see how they may apply to your campaigns. So that's always there, and that a lot of things mostly stay the same each report. So, we want to keep them in there, but not bore everybody with them. 2 new things today are we focus on performance, how it's correlated with the YouTube channel's engagement ratio, and also how visitor retargeting campaigns perform too. So 2 new things that we haven't reported on. Maybe for many of you, they're old news, and you look at these every day. I know Adam posts on YouTube or on LinkedIn about the second one, but we've compared here the performance for simulcast campaigns that we can get into later, exact more of the specifics, but how their comment to view ratio actually correlates with performance to perhaps give a tangible takeaway there. We also look at how do visitor retargeting campaigns do, where for a brand, if you've got a bunch of people who visited your website who did not yet convert, and maybe you're in other channels already retargeting them. When we do that in audio, and we're not the first ones to, I think maybe we've made it slightly easier, but now we have much more insight into those campaigns. How do those compare? And from what we see, they generally do quite better. That's not the full story, their attribution results. We'll get more into that later. And then also we go more into audience buys, how direct show buys are trending relative to general audience buys, and we compare and contrast programmatic buys bought through a DSP versus, say, run-of-network buys that are bought directly with a publisher. So, all right, fast figures. I won't dwell here. A lot of these are pretty similar as before. Roughly 98,000 campaigns. We pull all these from a rolling 12-month window, just so it's not purely the last quarter. Each quarter, one quarter bumps out, and then a new quarter comes in, getting close to 1,000 advertisers, tens of billions of impressions across both streaming and podcasting. So we compare and contrast here. I think what's interesting, we compare the streaming conversion rates per impression to the podcast rates. So I think it might have been Brooke from Strategic Media last time. She might have asked, well, are you using the same conversion window for these rates? And the answer still is not yet. It's still a 14-day conversion window versus a podcast 30-day. I think we're hoping by the next time we can have an equal conversion window. But even when we compare anecdotally, it doesn't dramatically change the story, although it makes it a bit closer. But we do use the 14-day window for streaming in the 30-day pod because that is what we find pretty much all of our advertisers are using. So in a sense, that's probably what your results are going to be looking like if you're measuring both with us. And what we see here too is while the streaming rates per impression, while they're not quite as efficient as the podcast rates, the cost per acquisition, they're in the same ballpark, I think you could say. And actually the cost per visitor is a bit better. And I think, as most people know, streaming, the rates are more affordable, but yeah, perhaps the impressions are not quite as potent. Matt or Cam, did any of this surprise you?
I think one of the things that's interesting to call out is the attribution conversion rate. So that's literally of those people that were exposed that went to visit the website, how many of those went on to make a purchase? And I think it was a little bit closer last time, and in this time it's separating a little bit. And I'm wondering if this isn't perhaps related to no longer being in the holiday season, so we're not seeing people sort of as engaging as much as they used to with podcasts, or they just don't have as much intent, or not engaging with audio or conversions in general, and don't have as much intent as it was in Q4. So I do think that the drop there is maybe like better stabilization of what we should expect from streaming audio generally compared to podcasts in terms of driving those that convert. That's one of the things that kind of popped out to me. I don't know, Cam, if you've got other thoughts.
Yeah, I would say the cost per visitor is something that I would expect to see for streaming audio to be more efficient compared to podcasts because of the lower CPMs. But we talked about this on the last PPB, that the premium dilemma, right? If I'm paying for a premium service, I'm likely not getting any of those DAI ads on streaming. So those that are free users that are getting the ads may not have as much disposable income. I think we did an analysis too in the audience composition that generally speaking, the streaming audio audience, because it is those that are free users, are in a lower household income or net worth bracket. So getting one of those free listeners to convert is clearly what we see in the data, costing brands more.
And I don't think there's an argument here to be made of one versus another. Does it make sense to only participate in podcasts because it drives more efficient cost per acquisition? I think the answer is no. When we look at the overlap between podcasts and streaming audio, those of you that have been here probably know this stat, but there's really only about, at least in the US, 20% overlap in the audience of streaming audio compared to the audience in podcasts. And I think, Cam, rightly so, you're calling out like the confounding variable on that is probably household income. Those that, let's say, have ad-supported music, non-subscriptions is maybe the right way to put it, may be different than those that are listening to podcasts. And I think we see that within some of the DMA analysis that we did before and some of the other TransUnion audience segments that we overlaid on, that it's pretty common podcasts have a higher household income than streaming audio audiences.
And just being cognizant that we have so many first-time watchers or attendees and second-time attendees, we will have the full set of these in the full report, that we sort of expand on a bunch more data cuts. So if there are specific views that you're looking for, we'll touch on them and with how you can access them through the AI tool, but they will also always be included in the full PDF report that we produce.
Yeah, maybe have a step back. John Kane asks a good question. How do we define streaming audio? And the definition is those that are listening, let's say, to the stream of a radio station and the ads that they're being exposed to there, or those that are listening to ad-supported music, like through Pandora or Spotify. So that's generally speaking how we define streaming. All right, cool. Fast figures. Who knew? So much conversation for a couple of numbers on the screen. It's great.
All right. Video adoption trends. This slide, we could basically say the same thing we say every time. Video adoption continues to grow. Simulcasts, they're continuing to become a bigger and bigger thing despite YouTube's measurement hurdle. So I think, last time the data stopped at high 70s. And what does this show? This black line here is for all of the campaigns that we track out of the 80,000 that are an episodic campaign where an advertiser is buying their ad to get put into a single episode. What percentage of those campaigns have both a podcast RSS component and a YouTube component? And at this point, I think it's safe to say the vast majority of times when you buy an episodic ad, you are going to be getting YouTube views with that ad. The publisher may add it on or count it in different ways, but it's pretty safe to say very likely your ad will also be running in YouTube. And probably to some extent, you'll be paying for that. So I think then it comes to, well, how are you tracking it? How are you measuring it? And the blue line there is of the simulcast campaigns we have where they're both on RSS, on an RSS feed where we get downloads and on YouTube. What percentage of that consumption happens on YouTube? So if we get 100 total plays of the episode, where maybe then from this blue line tells us that as of April 2026, roughly 70 of those plays will be on YouTube and 30 will be on audio. So that number both continue to climb it. And what that represents is that of the listeners for these shows that are simulcast, what percentage of the listenership is happening on YouTube. So black is what percentage of shows, essentially. And then blue is roughly what percentage of content or listenership for those shows.
Cam, do you have anything to confess in this slide?
Yeah, I think last PPB, I made a bold statement that we'd be at 100% of campaigns are simulcasts, but I think I gave 18 months. Looking at the math, I think we're looking
at a little bit more time.
Realistically, 4.5 years if this trend continues. Pete, not to add to our laundry list of innovations for future PPBs, but I'd also be curious to know sort of how this breakdown of impressions that are YouTube also compare to Rumble, to Spotify Video, and I know Apple HLS is still very early days, and we've seen sort of publisher adoption is slow moving, but something that I think, speaking for the people, would be interesting
for sure.
Understanding.
Yeah, I think next time this graph should probably change to be like a pie chart or like a bar with different levels in it. So something for next time. And Robert, so yeah, I should define episodic better. So episodic is when you buy on a show and your ad is put in only typically the latest episode, and you get all more or less all downloads for that episode. So it won't be running across all episodes of the show. Going to Spotify video. Last quarter, we started reporting on Spotify video adoption. And this is where a show enables Spotify listeners to watch video, which it could be either, Rob, baked in or faked in. But so in this case with Spotify video, I think maybe most people are familiar, but yeah, for those who aren't, it's when a show enables video on Spotify. There are some caveats with it in that your Spotify consumption, when you opt into Spotify video as a show, will then no longer pass through to your RSS feed. In some cases, posing challenges with DAI, and definitely as far as we are aware, making baked in attribution quite challenging, if not generally impossible for the time being. So that being said, the number is definitely growing. Of the top 100 shows that we track, roughly a third are now opted into Spotify video. I think last time it might have been like 15 to 20%. So there's definitely been some growth. Of the top 500 shows, it's a bit lower, but also still growing. So what do you think? Do you think Matt and Cam, this number will go the same way as YouTube?
Make it a bigger bet, Cam.
I think it's going to continue to grow until advertisers realize the impact on their measurement. I think we're going to, this is a shiny new thing. This is, there's certainly benefits for those first movers. I know podcasters are better able to monetize and get paid through Spotify. And so I think we're going to see more jumping on that bandwagon. But when the advertiser dollars start halting because they now lose visibility, I think we might have some reverters to disable this.
And I feel like I've got a slightly more optimistic view. I don't think it's an if we get baked in measurement for Spotify video. I think it's a when at this stage, that it will be coming at some point here in the future. I also think too, Pete, to your point, we have over 100% growth from PPB to PPB here in terms of the top 100 shows that are opted into Spotify video, which I think is a testament, right, to the concept here that shows see the monetization opportunities with Spotify video. And I believe that there is a first mover advantage that is associated with the publishers that are moving over to Spotify video right now. I think that advantage is going to start to wane as that percentage of top shows gets up closer to 100. And so we'll probably see that opt-in go a little bit slower over time. But if we sort of bring parity in measurement for Spotify video baked in with everything else on the audio side within podcasts, it may actually drive more advertiser dollars. We may start seeing that video does indeed drive the performance that I think we all expected that YouTube simulcast episodes would have driven. Mm-hmm. So I think super high level, there could be, like the next PPB, we might have some really interesting things to kind of talk to there. I think maybe only one other thing to kind of call out is we don't have a lot of stats yet to show how might this perform compared to, let's say, Apple HLS. And Apple HLS is probably one of the most hyped things with the least amount of support that we've seen in the industry today. So we're kind of still very anxiously and excitedly waiting for more Apple HLS campaigns to come through. We've run maybe a couple now, but we're just kind of waiting for, I think, more advertiser adoption and also more adoption on the ad hoster or the show hosters and ad servers out there as well, as they start to not just support baked in, but also dynamically inserted. I think dynamic insert is a little easier, baked in a little bit harder. So that's what we're kind of seeing in the space and what I think is going to change.
One quick call out too for Spotify video. So my understanding, and Matter can't keep me honest if you think otherwise, is that when a show opts in to Spotify video, in most cases, they still can do dynamic ad insertion for many shows. The caveat though is the dynamic ad insertion, which can be pixeled, still is only then goes to the non-premium Spotify listeners. So you can still do it, but it's just no longer, the dynamic ad insertion is no longer to the premium listeners, which,
Right.
we obviously don't have shows. We're not doing the calculation on our own, whether what's worth it or not. But yeah, just to call out. So
Definitely.
all right. Moving on to, were you going to say something, Matt?
Oh, no, not at all. I think I was just going to take over.
Okay. Go for it. Let me pass to you.
Perfect. So ad load, I think ad load is something that we talk about almost every single PPB. It's an important metric, and we'll show you why it's such an important metric. But as we look across the last however many years, 5 years now, we've seen a fairly consistent trend up and to the right with ad load. Now, let's just make sure everyone is on the same page. When I say ad load, what do I mean? Because this is represented as a percentage. It is quite literally saying what percentage of the content was an ad. So if I have a 100-minute episode and 5 minutes of that episode was an ad, that's 5% ad load. So I think the first thing to call out here, yes, we continue to go up and to the right. I think that trend line very well represents the growth in ad spend that we've been seeing in podcasts and audio generally over the last 5 years. I think now, depending on the source, we're either at like 6 billion in global ad spend or 9.5 billion in global ad spend. I think Hernan had posted maybe about a month ago now. Either way, we're talking about some pretty decent numbers in the B's. And so this kind of shows that growth over time. Now, one of the other things to kind of call out is you notice that we had a drop in ad load in Q1 2026. That's not an indication of a drop, I think, in the ad spend within podcasts. Generally, that's a typical seasonal trend that we see. So if I go ahead and move us forward one slide here, you're going to notice that circle on every single Q1. And if you just back up one tick mark for each one of those, you're going to notice that almost always that ad load drops after the Q4 holiday season. So this is a very common seasonal thing that we see. I would anticipate the next PPB, we'll probably see it going back up and to the right a little bit. But that ad load going down, definitely nothing to worry about from our perspective, and definitely expected. I don't know, Cam, Pete, got anything else to add there?
Or to put it the other way, don't get your hopes up, buyers, that ad load is dropping.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I would say, compared to other channels, there's still a lot of room to grow for podcasts and ad load, which not to be doomsday-ish, but I think this will continue to grow until we get parity with what we see and something like CTV, where I think we're approaching like 25-30% ad load.
Yep, not there yet.
But I think too, it's worth mentioning for increasing total podcast ad spend, the other levers besides just purely stuffing more ads in there are targeting the ads better to make them work better. So advertisers are happier to pay higher CPMs. So that's also where I think probably perhaps the most interesting way to grow the spaces that doesn't overly irritate every listener. And also I think better targeting too is better for the listeners if you're receiving ads that are actually mostly relevant for you, at least in the dynamic setting.
Well, in the previous PPB, we also did an analysis to showcase that longer form host read ads were more persistent in driving a stronger conversion rate against a podcast that had a higher ad load. So again, there are some tools that can be available of how you are building out creative for a show that has a high ad load to sort of combat some of the drops in performance that we see.
And speaking of that drop in performance, let's maybe just quickly talk about what we see as ad load goes up for a given show. We do see performance drop. And I think my initial reaction to this information is not just avoid the high ad load shows, because I think anecdotally, and maybe there's something that we can drum up in terms of analysis here, but it's not uncommon to see the higher ad load shows also being sort of the higher reach shows as well, typically those that are really, really highly monetized. And I think there's sort of a few ways to think about it. So yes, like let's have Jason Bateman from SmartList talk about my brand. Absolutely. And I think that's a reach play, and you'll get some performance for that for sure. And then there's another leg to that stool where you can do things like, Pete, to your point, audience targeting, which maybe is a little bit more precise and a little bit more relevant to the person that's listening. But also too, and this is something I feel like we see a lot of our friends on the buy and the sell side talking about, maybe we should be also thinking about the mid-tail and the long-tail shows more often, and the independent shows that have smaller audiences, that have not just small but mighty audiences that are super heavily engaged with that host. And I think that's kind of what this graph kind of helps to dictate here, which is higher ad load for reach, and maybe some of those medium, smaller size and audience targeting tactics to drive performance is sort of a really good way to have a well-rounded plan or portfolio when buying podcasts. I don't know if you guys have other thoughts on that.
Said it perfectly.
Nice.
Just that it would be interesting to pull performance, to split out ad load by host read or produced read ad load. I mean, because I think we've seen before, as Cam, you were saying, that host read ads are more resilient to higher ad load. Their performance goes down less. But yeah, it would be interesting to split this out by host or produced ad load.
I think we did last time. And I think what Cam's insight was, maybe I'm thinking about it differently, Pete.
Or I'm just thinking like the total, maybe we fully solved that one here, but yeah.
I mean, there may be other ways to look at it, but I think to Cam's point, like if you've got a host read ad that is on a show that has high ad load, it seems to be more resistant to the pull down of performance, because it feels like content is, I think, the reason why, right? It doesn't feel like an ad necessarily.
Right. Well, right. I think we pulled, it was like the graph was performance for host read ads, but I don't know if the ad load was total ad load.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point. It's not, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Well, hey, we've been getting a lot of really great recommendations in the comments, by the way, for like, hey, what if you do this or what if you do that? So please keep them coming in. We'll sit here and talk to ourselves a little bit about some other really good things we can include in the next one. But if you have ideas, pass them our way.
And I'll also encourage you, if you do have those ideas, throw it in a question. Those get memorialized after the webinar. We lose the chat, so we'll make sure to try and take note of anything that's coming through the chat. But if you want us to remember it, the Q&A is a great place.
All right, well, let us move on to simulcast engagement versus performance. And I think the reason why we wanted to talk about this a little bit is, when we are, let's say, using the Podscribe planner tool or something else you might be using to help with your planning for podcasts, finding sort of the shows that have, let's say, a high share of their impressions in YouTube or other simulcast platforms could be something that people maybe veer away from a little bit, and maybe we're to blame for that a bit as well, because we had a lot of conversations and a lot of research out there that talks about the higher the simulcast, or should I say the higher the share of impressions that are happening on YouTube, the lower things like promo code redemptions and vanity URL visits we observe. And I think it's important to say that that isn't necessarily always the case. And to kind of help dive into that, we'll talk a little bit about engagement scores. But before I guess I'll bury the lead for just a moment. Let's talk a bit about simulcast and YouTube channels, and maybe how folks in the audience think about using them or evaluating them when including them on a plan. So the question is, do you use, or how do you use, comment to view ratios of YouTube channels to evaluate shows? So 1, not at all; 2, rarely; 1 or 3, a fair amount; or 4, always. Or what people's thoughts are. Maybe you're like, what the heck is a comment to view ratio? That could also be a valid response as well, which we will define here. All right, are we there? Survey says. Not at all. All right, 42% not at all. I would say like bottom 2 box, that's like 3/4 of the audience here, where maybe the engagement score is not necessarily something. And Adam, like right on time, man, like always, every single time, and I think you're the inspiration for this slide and even for the engagement score capability. Let's talk a little bit about that engagement score and what it is, and then let's talk about why we think it's so important. So engagement scores here, what you're going to see if you're using Podscribe and you're sort of trying to take a look at simulcast shows, one of the things that we track is engagement. The concept is how actively engaged is the audience with the host. And a proxy that we try to look at is how many comments do we have, let's say, within a specific episode for a podcast on YouTube, and create essentially a ratio for the difference between, let's say, the number of comments divided by the total number of views. You can imagine that a show that has 1 million views on YouTube, but only one comment, has a very low engagement score. And something that has a lot more comments and the same number of views has a higher engagement score. And so the way that we represent that in here is we calculate all of those ratios at a per show or per episode basis. And then we'll sort of stack rank them. And the engagement score that you're seeing here, which is sort of like our newer engagement score methodology, is to do it based on percentiles. So are you sort of better than 75 or 76% of all other shows in terms of engagement scores? Kind of what you're seeing here within this Crime Junkie example with that 76th, if I say that right, green number there next to the YouTube icon. And so it's through these lenses or through these tactics that we create these engagement scores. And it's right there within the Podscribe research tool on the Discover Shows page. So you can kind of take a look at what the engagement is for each individual show. And we can dive in on some specific findings there. But Cam, Pete, yes, please.
Yeah, quick point. So right now we don't use YouTube likes. We only use comments. I've been sort of waiting for an Adam McNeil post on LinkedIn to say how to use likes. Just kidding. But we do think comments, maybe there is a world in which we could use likes, but generally we think comments are harder to spoof and a more reliable indicator for the show's engagement. So, and also here in the findings that we're about to have, we did focus specifically on YouTube engagement over podcast engagement. And from my perspective, I think the YouTube engagement is a bit cleaner because you have it per video. People like know about the comments; they're right there. Whereas with podcasting, we use the ratings, but who's really rating a podcast multiple times? Ratings only go up. If a show goes down, how does that really work? So the ratings in podcasting are, somewhat useful, I think, for this purpose. But I think the YouTube engagement metrics are a bit more helpful here. And also, I think the other reason too that we're looking at the YouTube metrics is because there's a much bigger gap in YouTube measurement. And our thought is, well, can we use these engagement metrics to help better predict performance too? Whereas in podcasting, we can pixel it, we can get the listener IP.
Could we see a potential V3 where we're looking at the syntax of those comments? Or, am I dragging Joe Rogan for his latest take on a hot topic? Or am I...
or people are saying, I'm never listening again.
Yeah.
Oftentimes that's actually maybe beneficial for advertisers. I don't know. Joe Rogan's episode is probably more popular after someone says that. I think the other thing to kind of call out here too, just hearkening back to some of the analysis that we've done before, right? When looking at the performance of shows that are mostly audio versus the performance of shows that have a lot of simulcast, there's a multitude of different things when we are modeling for the YouTube performance that we use to kind of say, is this better or worse for performance? And so we've found some specific attributes, like how early on is the ad in the episode. And the earlier in the episode, typically the better the performance, because we have a tendency to see more people drop off early in the episode in YouTube. It's sort of the best part about the algorithm in discovery, but also the worst part because it could drag you away. We also look at things like the subscription base from a global from a geo perspective. So if you're a US based advertiser, if 50% of the subscribers for a YouTube show are global or international outside of the US, we see that negatively impacting performance as well. Again, typically in things like promo code usage and vanity URL usage. And so I think, not to bury the lead here, so let's move on. What we found is kind of interesting in that it doesn't always mean that a lot of YouTube from a simulcast breakout between audio and YouTube, it doesn't always mean that performance is going to get worse. In fact, this confounding variable of engagement, these engagement scores that we just talked about, is a very interesting proxy that can tell us that a simulcast show with a lot of YouTube views that have also a lot of engagement could actually be beneficial for you as a buyer. And so let's quickly read out this graph so everyone kind of sees what we see. So that purple line is percent podcasts. So in other words, for a show that, let's say, has 25% engagement, we kind of go up here and we see like perhaps 75% of that audience is in podcast, 25% is in YouTube. And we kind of see that line going down and then up once we hit the 75% mark. So that means in that final far right quadrant, what we're seeing is that from the 75% to the 100% engagement, we actually see a lower share of YouTube views or downloads for that given show. So that's probably the first thing to kind of call out. I don't know, Pete, if you got something to add there. Oh, okay, cool. Very, very sensitive to people coming off mute. And then the other line to kind of call out here is the yellow line. That's the promo code conversion rate. And so that's us looking at the unique promo code given for that advertiser to see how well it converted on the advertiser's website, because we get that information from a site pixel. And you'll notice a very clear up and to the right trend that lower engagement scores typically show lower promo code redemptions. Higher engagement scores typically drive higher promo conversions. And I think the other thing to kind of call out here is you actually see in that final far right quadrant that even as the, or should I say, even as, I'm not even actually, sorry, I'm not looking at the far right quadrant. I'm looking at the three quadrants to the left. So not the 75 to 100, but to the left. The fact that we see the share of YouTube views go up, but conversion rates also go up is sort of counterintuitive to how we've kind of talked a little bit about this in the past, saying things like more YouTube typically drives lower performance. It's not the case when you look at this through the lens of engagement scores. So having or seeing those conversion rates go up with higher engagement, I think is a good telltale sign for how buyers might be picking or choosing their shows as they're trying to identify which simulcast shows work best. I don't know, Pete, Cam, you got other things to throw out there?
Well, yeah. So I guess if I'm a buyer and I'm looking at this, I think the takeaways I would have are that generally, if there's two shows and one has a way higher engagement ratio, a comment to view ratio than another, all else equal, probably the higher comment to view ratio show is probably a better bet. I think it's safe to say there seems to be something. The data definitely trends that way. Would it happen in every case? Certainly not. But all else equal, it's probably a better bet to go with a show that has a higher comment to view ratio. Maybe that's very obvious to a lot of people, but yeah. So we have that in the platform. You can search by it. You can see it for every show, the percentile for how they rank relative to other shows. And then I think too, the key point for this blue line to me is that engagement percentile is actually doing, this graph understates it. The yellow line actually should be higher if you normalized the blue line. So the key point is actually, I think the relationship between engagement rate and performance is even stronger than what this graph, the yellow line, shows. Because before we've shown that, roughly the same amount of YouTube views versus podcast downloads, those YouTube views will get roughly 70% the number of conversions that the podcast downloads will. So on the far right, these shows, maybe because they're focused on YouTube, hard to say exactly, but these simulcasts are having way more YouTube views than podcast downloads. Yet in spite of that, their performance per promo code is still better. So I think the yellow line, I think the trend is even stronger than what it is there. So arguably we should normalize for it soon, or in the graph. But yeah, in our YouTube modeling, we do account now, as of a couple of weeks ago, for engagement score of the show as a slight factor to weight shows higher that have higher performance, just as we do also weight shows higher that have more of, say, a US audience, which we went through in the last show. So
Cam, anything else?
What did you think, Cam?
Just want to clarify, based on some of the questions that are coming through, that the engagement is the comments on that. Like, obviously, from a RSS perspective, we can showcase how many downloads a show is receiving for a given episode or for a given podcast in general. So that's sort of how we're defining how engaged with the content is that audience by forms of comments on the YouTube channel. There is the comments aspect of being able to reply on Spotify, but we're not yet incorporating that data to calculate our engagements.
Yeah, so Rich, I agree that RSS downloads do have higher engagement and are way more intentional, and I think that has come out before in earlier studies we've done that show RSS downloads. You have the same number of RSS downloads and YouTube views. Probably the same number of YouTube views will drive only 70% of the conversions, roughly, that RSS downloads will. So I agree, for sure, in that, yeah, the consumption would be a great metric to measure engagement on RSS. The trouble is, I don't know if, it's not always the easiest thing to get. We'd have to work with publishers to grant access to the data. So definitely, I think it would be great. And so I appreciate the questions. And Brittany, so the engagement stats are there for shows opted into Spotify video, but it's based only on their RSS feed or YouTube. I don't think we yet pull in likes for Spotify video. But we should. We should have a separate engagement for Spotify video. We don't yet, but we should.
And I think we see a lot of questions just around like the consumption of YouTube. Is the environment with which someone is consuming a podcast on YouTube perhaps would affect the performance? And I think, in our past analysis, what we've seen is, actually, even in some other research that's been done. So, one of the folks we work with all the time, Brian Barletta, Sounds Profitable, and Tom Webster over there did a great analysis on like, what is a podcast, especially in this new video age. And I think what we find is most people prefer to watch if they can. But when they can't, they listen, and they listen typically because they're multitasking. And so I think the expectation that we all had was that YouTube would be driving better performance because of that. And it was sort of maybe a surprise to us, however, that we did a lot of work to validate this insight, that just wasn't the case. And, I think we theorize a little bit that, like, I think engagement scores are one thing, how many comments to views, but like, what about retention? Like, for how long is that person actually watching that episode? And I think we see a lot more drop off on YouTube compared to audio today. And again, I think that's the double-edged sword of the recommendation algorithm. Mm-hmm. It gets them in, but it might pull them away too because of some really awesome looking thumbnail next to the video that they're watching.
I was just going to say, I don't have 20 other recommendations on my, in Spotify while I'm listening to that content that can easily distract me to a, different video.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, a lot of the feedback that's coming in is great, and the discussion is great. These are the discussions that we love to have, so definitely keep it coming in. But I am noticing we're down to 13 minutes, and we got a few more slides to get to. So what I'll do is I'll pass it off to Cam. Let's talk a little bit about site retargeting.
Let's get into it. So let's start with a poll. How do you approach targeting of first-party segments for your brands and audio? Never done it, would like to, since it's a common tactic in our other channels. Never done it, not a common thing for us. Doing it on a limited scale, doing it a lot as its core tactic of ours, or what even is this?
WTF?
And while those answers are coming in, just to set the foundation of how we approach site retargeting. This, as we mentioned in sort of one of those questions, that this is a common tactic in other channels. The way that we've solved site retargeting is through our smart serve capabilities, where we have a pixel on the advertiser's website. We see whatever actions they are pixeling and sending us. So that could be, a site-wide visit, that could be a landing page, that could be an email sign up, and that could be that lower funnel conversion. In a more traditional digital channel, I may refer to this audience as a cart abandoner. This is somebody who's come to the website, they've maybe added a product to their shopping cart, but they haven't gone through and actually made the purchase. So we have that pixel data to observe the different ways to sort of cut and slice the audiences that can be found engaging or converting with a brand. So for this specific use case, we are analyzing across several dozen advertiser campaigns. This is a newer capability. We rolled this out generally in Q3 last year. So,
sorry, Cam. I think people are saying they can't do the poll. Christy, could you try to resend it? If something's wrong with it, just so.
Okay. Good call.
We could do the poll. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, everybody. Try now.
Thank you. So I would imagine smart serve as a new benchmark, and the different types of ways that we're going to be able to cut and slice performance will be a new staple for PPBs. For this instance, we're specifically looking at retargeting campaigns where a portion of the audience that has made it to the brand's website, whether podcast drove them there or not, how can we get a new audio ad in front of them across our other buys? We are executing this through a VAST tag. So compared to other channels where I may need to export my first-party CRM, upload it to an onboarder, distribute that to the publisher, and start running a targeting or anti-targeting campaign against that audience, we can start doing that across a limited set of publishers today to actively target those audiences where we find them in the audio ecosystem. All right, so we've got some results. Fair distribution across the responses, 26%. Never done it, but would like to since you're doing it across other channels. Never done it, not a common thing, 33%. And doing it on a limited scale, 26%. We've got three responders saying, what even is it? So hopefully that foundation of sort of how we're executing retargeting, we're building an audience based on who we see on the advertiser's website that have not converted. So this is a pretty phenomenal performance. Now, granted, this is, I would say, directional until we get more data to validate. We've got several dozen advertisers that are using this tactic today, but the performance is pretty impressive. So from a visitation rate, we're seeing more than a 7x visitor rate on smart serve retargeting compared to that advertiser's standard podcast campaign. So this is within the scope of those several dozen advertisers, not compared to the general podcast industry benchmark. And even, so from a purchase rate perspective, we're seeing smart serve retargeting is driving 5.5 times a stronger purchase rate compared to that advertiser's non-retargeting standard podcast campaigns. So we were pretty floored to see this performance across these campaigns. Most of these retargeting line items are in the top performance across the board. And the question that we had was, how believable is this, right? Like, there's going to be some caveats around, limited scale. If an advertiser only has so few audiences available to retarget. But this was a shocking sort of revelation that we've seen around this performance. And the question that we had was, well, how does this translate to incrementality? And looking at the comparison, we saw that typically incrementality was about 20 to 40% worse on those smart serve retargeting campaigns compared to that podcast standard targeted campaign or baked in campaign or programmatic campaign. Worst case scenario, where we're saying approaching 50% of the efficacy of incrementality. So using that 50% threshold, we have two funnels here. We've got our standard podcast campaigns where if we had 100 attributed conversions with our benchmark of 23% incrementality percentage on podcasts, that would give us 23 incremental conversions for that advertiser. So even with a 50% incrementality applied to those smart serve retargeting campaigns, we're starting with a much larger base. All right, so we've got 550 attributed conversions at a 12% incrementality rate, giving us 66 incremental conversions, or just shy of 3 times the amount of incremental conversions that were previously driven. We've got that asterisk just calling out that this is several dozen advertisers, so we're confident in the data that we've seen, but would like to expand this to more brands across more industries to see and kick the tires if this is going to hold true. Matt or Pete, do you guys have any thoughts on why we're seeing this performance?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, this is not necessarily any novel, crazy tactic. I think it's tried and true in a lot of other channels. People went to your site, didn't purchase for some reason. All right, well, they're probably pretty good candidates for ads who are more likely than the general population. So I think it's kind of a semi-obvious thing, and I think people have been doing it long before we came around. I think maybe we can make it slightly easier for clients of ours who are measurement clients, but I think it's like a I think it's a fairly tried and true thing that we just want to make more available and more accessible. And from the campaigns we've done so far, it seems like it works great, even when you factor in probably the likely reduced incrementality. I would say the main and perhaps most obvious drawback of these campaigns too is that scale is not going to be infinite, or it's limited to the visitors you can find. So if it's a very small brand and you've got only tens of thousands of site visitors, there might not be a ton of scale. So in that case, I think the next step is more going to audiences who look alike your existing customers. So, but I think this is this is probably a good tactic that, if available, why not do it in audio like it's being done in other channels, if of course privacy allows for the brand.
And I have thoughts, but let's keep going because we got however many slides left in 4 minutes. So let's do it.
Couple left. So single show versus audience buys. We've been monitoring the trend of this over the past couple of PPBs, but we've got a new data cut to showcase. So how often do you buy or sell single show campaigns as compared to multi-show audience buys, for example, a run of network or programmatic? And while responses are coming in, just to showcase the rise of popularity for these audience buys, over the past couple of quarters, we've seen a pretty consistent increase of what percentage of impressions tracked that are audience buys and what percentage of those impressions that are programmatic buys. We've provided our assumptions around better data, better technology that allows for audience buys to drive a stronger impact for advertisers. This PPB, we're looking at a breakout of those through a direct run of network, working with the publisher directly to execute that run of network, or a programmatic buy through a DSP. Just to highlight some of the responses, we've got 17% saying all single show buys, 42% saying mostly single show buys, 33% mostly audience buys, and 8% saying all audience buys. And I'm sure there's maybe a fifth option too of a 50-50 split. But in any sense, we do see that from a performance perspective, direct shows driving a stronger visitor and purchase rate compared to the audience target for a run of network or a programmatic campaign. But programmatic having a much lower cost per acquisition. Some assumptions around lower CPMs for those programmatic buys versus a direct run of network. Pete or Matt, any thoughts, or you want to?
No, I think you're right. Probably the big thing here is like, what's the average CPM based on working with someone directly buying a show, directly buying Ron versus programmatically. I think we're used to seeing CPMs being a bit lower in programmatic ecosystems. So it's probably not a surprise. The great part here is that programmatic is still performing well enough to make that CPA low enough to be considered in part of the portfolio of tactics that buyers can take advantage of. So I think it makes sense.
Definitely. Just to highlight sort of what we reiterated, we didn't address many of the sort of staples in previous PPBs because we have all of that data in those previous PPBs, but those decks are like 80 pages long. So if you wanted to check out the Podscribe AI to ask about which placements, which ad lengths, which producer versus host reads, or seeing what conversion rates or performance that you can expect, that's another great use case. There's some example use cases of how we've integrated the AI to review obviously the PPB results, get summaries of podcasts, find success drivers in current or active campaigns, identify growth opportunities. I've seen creative ideation of like, I'm running an ad on, or I'm planning a buy on Theo Von. Help me put something funny and Southern for him to read. So a lot of great options for how that is bringing utility to your campaigns or your planning. Would love feedback too on ideas of how you'd like to see the AI work for your purposes. So appreciate everyone right down to the wire. PPB is always down to the wire in multiple aspects, but we appreciate your time and attention and participation.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Great to see you all.
Thank you all.
Take care, everybody. Great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Thanks all.
Yeah, don't forget to hit us up if you want a demo. We're happy to talk you through it. We will have the official version of the PPB out in the next, I would say, week or so. But as a webinar attendee, you're going to get this version earlier than others. And if you do reach out and you mention benchmark report in the How Did You Hear About Us section, we're happy to extend to you a special unique discount for new customers. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Well done.